In the United States right now, a quiet crisis is unfolding behind closed doors, not because of illness, not because of income, but because of what we're holding on to. Across the country, seniors over 60 are living with rooms full of objects that were once treasured, but are now quietly draining their peace, their energy, and even their freedom. These things don't scream for attention. In fact, they sit silently on shelves, in boxes, behind closet doors, pretending to be harmless. But over time, sentimental clutter can crowd out clarity. It makes downsizing feel impossible. It complicates relationships with children who don't understand what's sacred and what's just stuff. And worst of all, it can make aging in place harder than it needs to be. And here's the part most people won't tell you. Letting go isn't about being heartless. It's about being honest with what still holds value and what's only holding you back. So here's the question. What if there were 5 quick, powerful tests you could use to tell the difference between true sentiment and quiet clutter? If you've ever stood in front of an old item and whispered, "But what if I need this one day?" This video is for you. Drop a yes or no in the comments. Have you ever wondered if your memories are becoming clutter? And if you're ready to feel lighter, clearer, and more in control of your space after 60, hit like and subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. Because what's coming next might change how you see every item in your home. Elzora May never considered herself a cluttered person. At 71, she still maintained her independence, drove herself to church on Sundays, and knew exactly where to find the best cinnamon rolls in Eugene, Oregon. She'd worked as a home nurse for decades, organized, practical, always the one who could calmly sort through a crisis. But after her husband passed away and the house got quieter, something strange began to happen. Drawers she hadn't opened in years started to feel heavier, not physically, but emotionally. The sewing box from her mother, the box of birthday cards from old neighbors, the 3 broken clocks in the garage that were just waiting for the right time to fix, they all started whispering to her. Not memories, not joy, but uncertainty. What if she accidentally threw away something meaningful? What if a grandchild asked about that wooden figurine, and she had already donated it? What if, someday, she needed it? It wasn't hoarding. It wasn't disorganization. It was something quieter, and more relatable than most people admit. Because for Elzora, every object held a story, and every story felt like a responsibility. She wasn't trying to preserve the past. She was trying not to dishonor it. Her home looked neat to visitors. But inside closets and underbeds were small piles of delayed decisions. Things she hadn't been ready to face after her husband's passing. Things she wasn't sure her children would understand. Things that, when she really looked at them, gave her a strange mix of comfort and guilt. Then one day, after tripping over a half-filled donation box in the hallway for the 3rd time, she realized something had to change. "I'm not just keeping things," she whispered. "I'm keeping fear." That moment didn't lead to a full clean-out. It didn't even lead to a donation run. It led her to ask one powerful question: how do I know what's actually worth keeping? And from that question came a process, a simple set of 5 personal tests she created for herself. Not harsh rules. Not minimalist dogma. Just quiet checks to help her understand whether an item was truly sentimental, or silently cluttering the life she still wanted to live. Elzora's story isn't extreme. That's what makes it powerful. She's not a headline. She's not a before and after transformation. She's just like millions of older Americans, trying to be respectful of the past, while still making space for what's ahead. And in the next section, she'll walk us through the first test that changed everything. Test 1. The Memory Freeze Test. Elzora hadn't looked inside that plastic bin for nearly 20 years. It was stacked neatly in the back of her guest room closet, labeled Tanya's Dance Things in faded marker. Inside were programs from recitals, glittery hair clips, and a pale pink pair of ballet slippers, barely bigger than Elzora's hand. Her daughter Tanya had worn them in the 3rd grade. She remembered how excited Tanya was to perform in her first solo, twirling awkwardly in a tutu that kept slipping sideways. The shoes still smelled faintly like baby powder and determination. But Tanya is 45 now. She hasn't danced in decades. She's a mother of 2, living states away, and barely remembers the recital herself. Still, Elzora kept the shoes. Not for Tanya. For herself. Because those shoes reminded her of who she used to be. A young mother, cheering from the front row, feeling important in the story of someone else's becoming. That box held more than just slippers. It held a version of Elzora's identity, one she wasn't sure how to let go of. This is the quiet danger of memory-based clutter. It doesn't scream for space. It whispers for permission to stay. And for seniors over 60, this is especially complicated. Because every decade behind us feels more precious. And every item from those years feels more sacred. But not everything that meant something in the past still serves the person we are now. The memory freeze test asks one powerful question: is this item honoring the past, or quietly trapping you in it? Sometimes, keeping a pair of tiny slippers helps you smile. But other times, it keeps you from noticing the empty space you could be using now, for art supplies, a reading nook, a place for your grandkids to nap. Objects tied to powerful memories can become frozen relics. And when we surround ourselves with relics, we stop designing our home for the life we're living today. That's what Elzora began to notice. She hadn't touched that bin, but she still tiptoed around it, physically and emotionally. So she sat down and asked herself honestly, if this disappeared today, would I feel peace or panic? And to her surprise, she felt relief. Because the memory wasn't in the shoes. It was in her. And it would still be there, whether or not she had a box of fading satin to prove it. She took a photo of the slippers, texted it to Tanya, who replied, "Oh my gosh, I forgot those even existed," and let them go. Not because they didn't matter, but because she realized they had already given her what they came to give. Now, she had space on that shelf. And space in her heart. The memory freeze test isn't about being cold. It's about staying warm in the present, instead of frozen in the past. And that's the invitation this first test offers to you. Ask yourself, what's the oldest memory item in your home? Do you still look at it, or just step around it? Tell me below. I'd love to hear what it is, and what season of your life it came from. Test 2, the suitcase test. Elzora wasn't planning to move anytime soon, but something about the silence in her house made her wonder what it might feel like to live with a little less. Not less memory. Less weight. So one afternoon, while sipping tea and reading an article about simplified living after 70, she imagined a scenario. If I had to move into a smaller home next month, what would I bring with me? She didn't expect the flood of emotions that came next. Her mind drifted to the basement, where rows of boxes lined the back wall. Some hadn't been opened in over a decade. One was filled with candle holders from church events. Another held a mix of VHS tapes, tangled extension cords, and a holiday wreath missing half its berries. She realized, if she were truly downsizing, she wouldn't take 60% of what she owned. Not because she didn't care, but because it no longer served her life. And that's when the question hit her. If I wouldn't pack it to go forward, why am I keeping it where I am? The suitcase test was born. This test is simple, but it reveals a hard truth. If you had to move next week, would you actually choose this item to come with you? And not just because you might need it someday. Not just because it belonged to someone you loved, but because it still plays a part in your real, daily life, or brings enough joy to justify the space it takes. After 60, many seniors in the United States start considering future transitions. Whether it's downsizing to a more manageable space, relocating to be closer to family, or preparing for a senior living community, those transitions often come with unexpected grief, not from moving out, but from leaving behind the objects we've allowed to define us. Elzora knew she couldn't bring everything. But more importantly, she realized she didn't want to. Some items she'd been keeping out of habit. Some out of guilt. Some because it was just easier to put them back on the shelf than to decide what to do with them. But as she started visualizing her suitcase life, something shifted. She became less attached to the things that didn't make the cut. That chipped punch bowl from a neighborhood potluck in 1988? Left behind. The extra fondue set that hadn't seen daylight since Reagan was in office? Left behind. What remained were the things that lit her up, her watercolors, a vintage music box from her honeymoon, a few framed family photos, and her favorite blanket that still smelled like her late husband's cologne. She wasn't trying to live like a minimalist. She was trying to live with meaning. And suddenly, her current space felt lighter too, not just physically, but emotionally. Because when you ask yourself what you'd choose to take forward, it becomes clearer what's just taking up emotional rent. So here's the question for you. If you had to move into a smaller home next week, what would you actually pack? What would make the journey, and what would you leave behind with gratitude? And if you've ever imagined starting fresh with just your essentials, you're not alone. But here's the twist. What happens when you come across something you've kept for years, and can't even remember why? That's what Elzora faced next, and it's where the third test begins. Test 3, the story test. It was small, dusty, and heavier than it looked. Elzora had completely forgotten about the ceramic elephant until she was pulling down a box of winter scarves from the hallway closet. Tucked into the corner behind an old purse and a brittle box of greeting cards, there it was, bright teal with a gold-trimmed saddle, a small chip on its ear. She picked it up slowly, stared at it, and tilted her head. "I think someone gave this to me," she whispered aloud. "Or maybe I bought it on a trip." She turned it over, hoping for a note, a date, a name, but there was nothing. And that's when it hit her. She couldn't remember who it was from. She didn't know when or why she got it. All she had was the object, with no story attached. That's the moment the third test revealed itself. Because even if something once had meaning, if that meaning is lost, blurred, or no longer tied to a story you can pass on, it may no longer be sentimental. It's just wait. The story test asks a straightforward but powerful question. Could you explain the importance of this item to your grandchild and have them understand why it matters? Not just that it belonged to someone, but what it represents. Why it mattered to you. What feeling it captures. Because if you can't do that, the item's meaning doesn't live in your heart anymore. It's just occupying your shelf. For Elzora, this was humbling. She always saw herself as a thoughtful keeper of memories. She believed everything she held onto had a reason. But the elephant had slipped through the cracks of time. And if she couldn't remember the story behind it, what would happen if her daughter found it after she was gone? Would she keep it, thinking it must be important? Would she feel guilty letting it go? That's the secret trap. When we keep things we can't explain, we pass that confusion down to someone else. It's not just physical clutter, it becomes emotional clutter for the next generation. Elzora realized that if she couldn't carry the story anymore, it might be time to release the object. Not because it didn't once matter, but because it no longer carried the clarity or connection that gave it life. She took a picture of the elephant, just in case the memory came back later, then donated it to a local thrift shop. Maybe someone else would fall in love with it the way she once did. This wasn't about forgetting. It was about making room for the stories that still live inside her, and making space for new ones to form. So here's the question for you. Have you ever found something in your home and had no idea where it came from? Be honest, what was it? And more importantly, did you feel the urge to keep it anyway, just because it had been there for so long? The story test isn't about judgment. It's about clarity. Because in the end, your memories matter far more than the objects that once carried them. And sometimes, letting go of the thing helps you hold on to the story even tighter. Test 4, the Future Eyes Test. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Elzora invited her daughter to help go through a few boxes in the spare bedroom. Nothing major, just the miscellaneous pile that had been growing quietly over the years. There were framed certificates from Elzora's nursing days, her husband's fishing lures, a bundle of silk flowers, and an old jewelry box with broken clasps. Her daughter, Kara, sifted through the items carefully, pulling each one out with polite curiosity. But eventually, she paused, held up a small wooden plaque, and said, "I don't know what half this stuff is, Mom. I don't want to throw it away, but I don't know what I'm keeping." That one sentence hit Elzora like a wave. Not because her daughter was being dismissive, she wasn't. She was being honest. And it made Elzora realize something no one talks about enough. If the meaning of an item lives only in your mind, it disappears the moment you do. The Future Eyes test asks you to view your possessions not as the owner, but as the next person who will stand in front of them, sorting, guessing, and trying to make the right choice without all the context you carry. After 60, especially for seniors in the United States who are thinking about estate planning, this test becomes more than practical, it becomes an act of love. Because it's not just about what you know. It's about what others won't. That music box Elzora adored as a child? Kara had never seen it before. The postcard from Paris she saved from her honeymoon? The writing had faded, and the date was illegible. Even the necklace Elzora wore for years had a clasp so tarnished it looked unimportant to anyone who didn't know its backstory. This was the difference between a personal memory and a legacy item. A personal memory only lives in your heart. A legacy item is something that others can understand, honor, and carry forward, even without your explanation. And that's what this test helps reveal. Elzora started asking herself, one item at a time. If I weren't here tomorrow, would this still make sense to someone else? Would it still tell its story, without me? Some things passed the test easily. Her wedding ring. A handwritten cookbook passed down from her grandmother. A baby blanket with a name stitched into the corner. But others didn't. A figurine with no inscription. A jar of sand from a beach she couldn't recall. A quilt she bought at a flea market with no family connection. It wasn't about whether the item was beautiful or expensive. It was about whether it would be meaningful in someone else's hands. So Elzora began tagging a few special things, not with sticky notes, but with stories. A typed label here. A small card tucked inside a box. A voice memo recorded for her grandchildren. Suddenly, her home began to feel less like a storage unit and more like a museum, one where the curator was still present, guiding the meaning behind each piece. If you've ever stood in someone's house after they passed and whispered, "I don't know what to do with all this," you know how important this is. And if you've ever inherited boxes of unmarked objects, unsure what to keep or toss, you understand the emotional weight that comes with mystery. So here's your question. If you weren't here tomorrow, would the most sentimental item in your home still tell its story, without you? And here's your chance to connect. Have you ever inherited clutter you didn't know what to do with? Comment yes if that's ever happened in your family, and what you wish someone had told you. Test 5. The Reciprocity Test. 4 years, Elzora kept her wedding bouquet sealed in a box on the top shelf of her bedroom closet. The box itself was unremarkable, just a plain, beige container with one side slightly bowed from age. Inside, the flowers were still intact, but the petals had browned and stiffened. The once creamy roses were now brittle, like paper left in the sun too long. The scent was gone. So was the sparkle. But Elzora couldn't bring herself to part with it. That bouquet had been in her hands the day she walked down the aisle in 1974. It had soaked up her nervous palms and caught tiny tears during the vows. It had been tossed and caught, laughed over, photographed, and then gently boxed away. She'd kept it to preserve the moment. But over time, the object began to feel more like an obligation than a celebration. Then one day, while organizing a drawer of old photo albums, she stumbled on a picture, herself in her wedding dress, holding the bouquet with her chin lifted, laughing in full sun. Her husband beside her, grinning wide, one hand on her waist. Her eyes lit up. "That," she said to herself, "is the memory I want to keep. Not the withered bouquet in a forgotten box. The feeling in that photo." That's when the reciprocity test clicked into place. This test is all about emotional return. Every sentimental item we keep should give something back: comfort, joy, warmth, pride. If it only tugs at guilt, sorrow, or the heavy feeling of "I should keep this," then it may no longer be serving us the way we think. After 60, our emotional energy becomes more valuable. We protect our time. We protect our health. But too often, we forget to protect our space from things that quietly take from us more than they give. The reciprocity test asks a powerful question. When you see or touch this item, does your heart feel heavier or lighter? If it brings you peace, keep it. If it lifts your spirit, display it. If it connects you to your values, your roots, or your joy, then it belongs with you. But if it only stirs discomfort or sadness, ask yourself why. Elzora realized that the bouquet had served its purpose. It had carried the memory long enough. The joy wasn't in the dried petals, it was in the photo, the stories, the years she lived with her husband after that day. So she let the bouquet go. Not with sadness. With a kind of reverence. She slipped the photo into a new frame and placed it on her dresser, where she saw it every morning. That's the power of sentimental items that give back. They become anchors of gratitude, not guilt. So ask yourself this. What's one item in your home that still gives you joy when you look at it? Tell me your favorite below, because sometimes, the smallest object can hold the biggest piece of our heart. And if something you're holding no longer gives back, it may be time to gently thank it and let it rest. Elzora didn't clear out her life overnight. There was no dramatic moment with trash bags and tears, no massive purge to prove a point. What she did instead was far more meaningful. She listened. To herself. To her space. And to the quiet tug of clarity that had been whispering for years beneath the clutter. She didn't get rid of everything. She got rid of what no longer belonged to the woman she was now. The 5 tests didn't make the decisions for her. They helped her see each item for what it really was. A story, a season, a symbol, or simply a leftover from a life chapter that had already closed. Some things she passed down, with handwritten notes so her grandchildren would understand why it mattered. Some she digitized, old photos, fading letters, childhood drawings, preserving the memory while freeing the shelf. Others she photographed one last time and then donated or recycled, not with regret, but with quiet thanks. And here's what surprised her most. The less she kept, the more she remembered. Without the noise of outdated possessions and forgotten objects, her mind felt freer to revisit the memories that truly mattered, on her own terms, in her own words. Her home feels different now. Lighter. Not just because there's more space, but because what remains feels intentional. Each room reflects her current rhythm, not just the echoes of yesterday. And the anxiety she once carried, about what would happen when someone else had to sort through her things, is gone. Because now, what's left behind will make sense. It will tell a story. One that doesn't burden, but blesses. This is the transformation we don't talk about enough. Decluttering isn't about letting go of love. It's about choosing what love looks like in this season. It's about respecting your past without being ruled by it. It's about creating a home that gives you energy, not one that quietly drains it. And it's about trusting that the people who matter most won't need boxes of old things to feel connected to you. They'll remember your laughter, your advice, your presence, not the chipped mug in the cupboard. So let this be your gentle reminder. You don't have to keep everything that touched your heart. You just have to keep what still touches it now. If even one of these 5 tests helped you think differently about what's in your home, hit that like button. Share this with someone over 60 who's ready to declutter without shame. Someone who's looking for freedom, not finality. And subscribe to Wise Aging Sceners for weekly wisdom made for your real life, not just your stuff. Because the next chapter of your life deserves to feel just as light, clear, and intentional as you want it to be.